the last, well, free moments over the last couple of days. Moving the enclosure reclamation thing. It has been all cleaned up. Now it has a new paint job. So the time has come to transfer the parts into it. Nice close up of the paint here. Definitely a whisker style paint job. My patented textures using black, gold, and a little bit of silver. Okay, so that's that. It needs to be opened up. Hopefully the paint is hard enough that the screwdriver doesn't mess up the work that's been done on these screws. It's been drying or curing for about 18 hours, so hopefully that works out. Let's see. Yep. So just be real careful with this because the paint is fresh. I intentionally did not put them in very tight. Partially so that it would be easy to break it loose, and partially so that some of the paint could get into the crack between the bottom cover here and the case itself. No, I wasn't going to bother painting the inside of this because it was already perfect, so might as well just leave that one be. I didn't end up using the wire cut brush on it. I just continued with that abrasive pad. Took off all the paint chips. Okay. Carefully remove this. Nice. It did come in the edges here, so paint form should look uniform on the outside. Alright. Now that that's all opened up and ready to go, let's get it out of the way. Now we have to extract the contents of the previous enclosure for the circuit, which is this. And yeah, it's ugly. So we need to get these switches off of here. These are the selector switches. You can see on the back here there are 10 1/4-inch jacks. The 8 in the middle here are channels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we have the outputs left and right. This whole box is upside down at the moment. And the other thing we've got going on are switches in the front here. And the purpose of the switch has 3 different positions: left, right, and both. So input 1 can be sent to bus left, bus right, or both buses. And that happens through resistors, so all of the inputs can be summed together to some mix of them on the outputs. Very handy for getting around some of the limitations inherent in algorithmically or mathematically summing multiple audio signals inside of the computer due to problems with floating point rounding errors and overflows of the maximum bit depth. For example, if you were working in 24 bits and you took a bunch of 24-bit signals, added them all together, the resultant sum could be higher than a number that could be represented by 24 bits. Resistors don't have that limitation. We've got invaders.
Hello.
So there's the paint job. If you want to look at that.
Ooh. That's cool. It's got that hammered look.
Yeah.
I like it.
Careful, Blue.
Wait, did you use hammered stuff?
No.
Whoa. Was it hammered?
I sprayed it black, let it dry, sprayed it black, let that dry, and then on the third coat of black, while the black was freshly put on,
Yeah.
I sprayed the gold,
Okay.
and the gold was able to be pulled down into that black layer,
Yeah.
which gives it that three-dimensional effect.
I dig it. It's cool. Okay, Blue. That's enough of that.
You done eating yet?
He is, but I'm gonna give him a snack.
Rabbit hole's about to start. Alright, today I actually brought the nut drivers, so and of course they're not deep enough to actually reach. I could get sockets, but I'll just use crescent wrench. Or spanner for you weirdos elsewhere. I'm a firm proponent of the rule of if I know that you say it differently, and I know why you say it differently, that entitles me to make fun of you. See if I can get this stuff all moved over before I get busy with rabbit hole. Fortunately, it's just like 18 of these. I'm thinking that the black switches are nice, but I'm thinking of swapping them out for the cream switches, just because of the way that the gold pulled down into the paint. It resulted in kind of a creamy look to it, so I think the cream might go nice with this. The box was too big to fit inside of my oven for powder coating. I was going to go with pink powder coat, which I happen to have in stock, but I couldn't fit the box in the oven, so spray paint it was. Ooh, this thing is ugly and heavy. Now I think I can use the nut driver on these, so that'll speed things up just a tiny bit. Alright. Yeah, this unit was always just a temporary kind of situation. I was just experimenting with those switches. My previous version of this unit didn't have the switches, and it was just 4 stereo pair going in, and you couldn't select left and right. But this was so successful and so much more useful than the initial box that this prototype box ended up staying in service in the studio for a couple of years at least. But my new box is much bigger. Well, it's a lot smaller than this one technically, but it has a lot more channels. It's 32 inputs rather than the 8. And for what I do, that's a lot more useful. I no longer need to sum anything using math. I can sum it all using analog components, which is nice because you get that infinite resolution in both directions. I don't use it for it, but it would also be good at doing sample rate conversion, not mathematically, but by sending out on one interface at the native sample rate, running it through the analog gear, tweaking anything that needs tweaked, and then sampling it back in with the other audio interface running at the new sample rate. That is one way to avoid aliasing while doing that type of conversion. It's essentially impossible to do it without aliasing mathematically. You always get some sort of smearing. In case you ever wondered. I don't know if I actually need to take this apart. I may be able to slide it out. Let's try that before I get through too many screws here. Also going to be careful not to be too rough with it because it's all point-to-point soldered. I'm sure this rack enclosure will end up being another prototype before too long. There we go. Here's what we're after. That's the good stuff. So, like I said, the two on the end are left and right. And these are the inputs. And the inputs go to each one of the switches, and then the switches are going through resistors to the buses, and it's not just switching the tips of the signal, it is switching the tips and the rings. And the shields are all tied together into a ground bus. Now, there is a downside to doing this way. Kind of a downside if you want to think of it as a downside, but not necessarily a bad thing in all circumstances. In the circumstance where you want your stereo separation to be as separated as possible, then this probably isn't the best way of doing things, because there is a path between the left and the right buses, because the switch needs resistors that go to both for that both setting. But in that position, the amount of resistance between the two channels is twice the amount of resistance for the signal to go to just one channel. So there is that limitation of doing it this way, and you can kind of see that extra set of resistors on both sides there where it splits into two. Let's see, give you a better view. Yeah, it's these guys. These two or those two. Sort of Y off from the same lug. a really hard thing to get a view of. Yeah. Nice big chunky switches. Alright, as far as the technical explanation of what the heck I'm doing here, that's about it. Time to move things in. Okay, hopefully I don't need to enlarge in any of these holes. That would be a little bit troublesome, considering the paint's done. And hopefully the excess wire doesn't get in our way too much. Oh, let's see. It looks like the spacing is different enough that I may have to get creative with some rewiring. Because it's only going to stretch so much. Yep. And we already broke a wire. Okay, so this is going to take longer than I was hoping. Going to have to check the jacks as well to see if those are flexible enough. They're just held together by the bus line, so that's not so bad. This is the bottom of the case, the other side is the top. I need to decide if I want the jacks to be high or low on the back. I think low is probably better. Depends on if this is going above or below the audio interface. Making the assumption that it's going below, I would put them on the bottom. The outputs on that interface are on the top of the back, so to keep the cables as short as possible, it might make sense to put the mixer above. Aesthetically, I'm not sure that that would look as good though. I think even if this were going above, I would still want those jacks on the bottom, just to give a little bit more clearance between the inside of the rack enclosure and the jack, just to make it easier to plug things in. Essentially, there's going to be 8 wires that are going from these jacks looping right into the outputs of the audio interface, so keeping that as short as possible reduces the capacitance in the system. And because we have all of these resistors in circuit, when you add the capacitor and the resistor, you end up with a RC filter. So the longer the wire, the more the capacitance, the more the roll-off point changes into the audio spectrum. We want to avoid that. This is supposed to be as transparent as possible. If we were looking for color, we would have added in some sort of transistor or something into the mix. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So we really only need the middle 8 first. 1, 2, 3, 4. That would land that one there. And when I pulled this out, this side was up. And it was setting at, it was sitting upside down when I took it out, so we want to keep the same orientation. Oh, we got lucky. Very lucky. Get one of these on just so it stops moving around on me. It's really sad that the hardest part of all of this is the part that I'm going to have to redo, which is wiring up those bus bars. Let's see how many times my brain does that. Grabbing from the wrong pile. This is one of those professional level audio circuits that is very strange in the fact that pretty much anybody could make it. But that is not reflected in the price that people charge for buying them. I would say that there's a market there, but the number of people on the planet who understand why it makes sense to mix down this way is a rather small group of human beings, and almost all of them are capable of building one themselves. To make it more obvious that the last two jacks are not input jacks, I think I should either stagger them out to the next hole or even go so far as to move them to the other row. Oh, there's blue. Stress these solder joints too much. And my initial prototype on this without the switches, I did run it through transformers and long wires, so I had all sorts of interesting, crazy filtering effects going on in there. That's how you learn these things, I suppose. Set the ratchet real gentle. I don't want to stress the wires too much here. Go out to the edge of the table here, make this a little easier.
How's it going?
Well, switch spacing on the front is different enough that it's going to require some cutting and three-dimensional reconstruction. back sorted. I'm thinking cream is going to work better for the knobs on the front.
Like the chicken head knobs?
It's safe to swap out these black ones that were on there for cream, stock wise.
I don't know, how many are there? I can look.
Well, I've got these here in my hand.
Oh.
Got more than 8.
Okay, well then, we have more than 8. The chair is very low to the ground right now. So you gonna switch them?
Well, I can't get them to go into the holes. And
Oh.
one of my solder connections
Broke.
broke while trying.
No.
But the difference of where this one ends relative to its assigned placement on the front here
Yeah.
is only a little more than 1/4 of an inch shy over the length.
So you're thinking of desoldering and then adding a little more length and then resoldering?
Yeah,
Because is it just one that's off?
well, they're all hooked to each other, so
Well, yeah.
it's a little bit wrong at every iteration, and when you get to the end of it, you get the compound error, right?
Yeah.
It looks like the grub screws on the switches dinged the switches. So I can actually tell very easily which direction those chicken head knobs were installed because there's indentations from the screws.
That's useful.
Yeah.
Well, so then, I mean, if all it is a matter of... So all of them fit except one.
It's just whichever one no, they all don't fit.
Oh.
But there's a compound error
Oh.
and it gets more and more not fitting as you go.
Oh.
The thing is, if I cut it anywhere, that's 4 repairs I have to make.
Yeah, but your holes on the front won't look good. Right?
I think if I cut it somewhere in the middle, that divides my compound error by 2. That would only be 4 repairs I would have to make, not counting the wire that broke loose. Okay. The peanut gallery does not exist right now.
Yeah.
No one live, so I don't have any one to get any
Feedback.
advice from. Because no one loves me.
It's a very conclusion, jumping conclusion. The dog likes me now. He did not like me before. I took his Kong captive.
These repairs are going to be really annoying. Because it's going to heat up the joints around them.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to make it all fall apart.
I think they were soldered to begin with, weren't they? Couldn't you have just desoldered it at that point?
Not conveniently.
Huh. So 4 will fit in at a time?
Maybe. We're going to find out right now. I'm going to avoid breaking any wires here.
We need to find like more pliable cabling. Like we always end up using this
Pretty
cable.
good cable.
No, it's fine. It's functional, but it's very stiff. Like the jacket is very stiff, which is really obnoxious.
Well, they do make silicone stuff. I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be able to get away with that.
So the floor doesn't fit?
Not without this being kicked over at too much of an angle.
Well, that's because of the cables being stiff, right?
No, this is a metal piece that connects all of them together. And
Yeah.
there's 4 sets of those. So it doesn't really have any give other than the flex of the resistor that's connecting up to it.
Is it just one? Is it wires connecting to each other, or is it one wire that you've tapped in at multiple spots?
Combination thereof.
Oh man, that is a more annoying fix than.
Yep. This was supposed to be easy. Putting my cuts in between the two at about the halfway point. That way my heat has a little bit more distance to travel before it affects it. Sounds like somebody's down there.
Oh, yep. I'll go check and see who it is. Hey, look, there's people. It's people. It's people.
Alright, now we can reuse, quite likely, the salvaged material from saving this case. I did save these guys. This might help with saving the paint job, if it fits. And it does. Alright, so it does fit, but I want to make sure that these are fairly clean. So have you been considering getting a puppy? Are you still considering getting a puppy? Don't get me wrong, I like my puppy, but the realism of the situation gets loud occasionally. So because some of these are rusty, I'm just going to very quickly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, we've got 2 different types. Good to know. 6, 7. Actually, that looks different. Okay. 7. 8. Autofocus is only so good. I try to pay attention to it though. It's really a shame that people don't take the time to reclaim things as much. like, oh, it takes too much time, so I'm going to do this. It's going to take me 2 minutes, and it saved me waiting a week for parts to show up. And it didn't cost me anything, which is good on this project, because it's not even for my stuff, it's for somebody else's crap. Principally because I'm not using it anymore. And I would rather see it go to a good home than keep storing it indefinitely. It's interesting how that pot metal from the 80s, I can only assume it's oxidizing, but how it gets that yellow rainbow sort of look to it. Seems to be a different alloy than what we use for that kind of thing these days. Or, more accurately, what the Chinese use for that kind of thing these days. So y'all can't be discussing badge things in earshot.
I know, but Peter says they're cookies.
Beware bearded men offering cookies. Oh, looks like I cleaned one that's different size. Yep. 2 that are different size. I'm so good at this. Alright, so 2 more small ones. And that one is nasty. Scotch-Brite's abrasive pads are great. No one's ever going to see these, but I don't want to introduce any funk that I don't have to. Unless I'm making a funk song. Okay, there's those. Not quite sure, easy way to plug all these holes is. For now, I think I'm just going to leave them. We'll call it ventilation for a passive circuit that doesn't really generate heat. It's a little bit pointless. How did I manage to knock over every single screw that I stood up earlier? Okay. Once again, picked the wrong focus point camera. Test these two just to verify that when I tighten these up that the shafts are coplanar. And this is where we need to be super careful because that paint is still soft. I may even grab my hemostats for this job, but okay, there's one. It's okay. The paint is okay. Not too bad. Seems to have straightened up okay. Obviously going to have to go through all of these joints and verify everything again. It's not really part of the plan. Point-to-point wiring is going to be not too bad, I don't think. Yeah, probably not too bad. Try the hemostats this round. Serrated jaws on this make it a little bit nice, and it is a lot more controllable. Surprisingly good tool for this job. Alright, I'm going to cut these apart. Oh, definitely lost a wire in here. So I'm going to have to double check all these jacks now. Ooh, that's a bit gentle. Yeah, that one was a little bit hard to move without breaking anything. I do love point-to-point wire though. It is a lot more fun than PCB. Had a bit of a moment of fear when I was getting ready to take these switches off of the previous enclosure. I couldn't remember if I had used switches that required a keyed second hole, a small hole, next to the main pass-through hole for keying it. Fortunately, it did not, because otherwise I would have had to drill a bunch of little tiny holes through my fresh paint job here. That would have been less than ideal, to say the least. Okay, I think I can go ahead and install those switches on here now. I have my Allen key ready, and I have my switches ready. I am going to take a moment and put both in place, both color options that is. Just to see which one pleases the eye. One thing that is important here is these gold flecks that are in here. The cream goes very well with them. Now the black obviously goes well with everything, But I think the contrast between the black and the cream being picking up what the gold color did when I sprayed it into the wet black coat. In there and there, all throughout. There's some deeper stuff that's hard to see too, on the camera anyway. I think that's the right choice in this particular instance. I think that's going to look a bit better. So, I am going to indeed do that. Switches are tightened down. So we want to make sure that that switches, the switch, what do you call it? Knob? Yeah, knob. Is very well pointing straight up before tightening down this grub screw here. Not straight enough. Nice. I did set all the switch positions to being in the upright position before attaching the knobs. That's a bit like the always remember to put on your heat shrink before you solder kind of thing. So it looks like this one and this one still need some. Oh, this one's being a pain. So you remember the other day when we were taking that box apart and it was all like rusty and worthless? This kind of stuff is rewarding, even when it's not for me. Just love saving stuff from the dump. Some people say that, but then they just end up with a pile of crap that never gets used. And that's not what I mean. I mean saved from the dump and put back into use. Rabbit hole's definitely going to be starting up here shortly. I need to work quickly. There we go. Whatever. Okay. And of course,
Are you still streaming, Whisker?
yep. Okay, those are all in place. And that's looking pretty good. So channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The basic idea is that you can set channel 1 to left, right on 2, 3 on left, 4 on right, so on and so forth. That would give you 4 stereo pairs on your 8 outputs. But if you were doing like stereo guitar and you were doing a bass, that doesn't need to be stereo, and you were doing a kick drum, that doesn't need to be stereo, and you were doing a closed hi-hat and a shaker and crash and a ride cymbal. There's your mono drums all sorted. And then you send all those to a reverb bus, and you send the stereo reverb bus return to the same outputs that you're sending the guitar to. And then you've got a nice stereo image of the drum kit being played. But you're able to send out all these tracks independently. And what that means is when you send that kick drum out, you can send it out so that it's transient, you know, the moment that it hits and it takes up the loudest amount of available volume. It isn't sharing those 24 bits with the snare drum or anything else. So you can send this out as loud as possible. You can send all these out loud as possible, and they're not conflicting with one another. And you get that added benefit of when they're mixed together. They're mixed together by all of these mil-spec matched resistors instead of software. But none of it's going to work right now because it's all cut up and broken. So I suppose it's time to start repairing things. Looks like we lost our bus connection over here. Oh, this is going to be a chore. Let's shift you guys up and over. Get into soldering mode here. There we go. Okay, I need to make enough room here. So I'm going to put some of the tools that we're done with away real quick. I have a sneaking suspicion that hemostats are going to come in real handy. Alright, where's the soldering stuff? Well, we're going to need some power too. What else am I going to need? Probably some extra wire for patching. That sort of dictates wire strippers and such. I don't have any bare at the moment, so we're going to have to make some. It looks like a lot of our patches are going to be about the same length. Something along those lines. Could J-hook all of these. Might make things a little bit faster. My worry is that when I pull these out of the way to work, definitely going to end up breaking more connections. There's definitely some tenuous stuff in here. It was all built in place, so it wasn't really designed to deal with all the flexing that we've been putting it through. Well, start on one end and go to the other. This one's going to be touchy. I'm going to attempt to resolder it without stripping it back further. Brr. I have to be careful though, because we don't want to accidentally strip it back up into the point where the other wire could get in contact with it. There's a good reason why I put all of the jacks on the case before attempting to do any of the repair work. Moving things around is what's going to cause breaks. And because everything is rigidly affixed now, things will stay still when I'm not actively poking at them. Okay, that ring line is now a bit more attached. So our ground bus is actually back here at the jacks, and none of the grounds are going up to there. All the switching and stuff on here is just on the tips and the rings. And then visually inspect as I go across and see if I'm having any breaks anywhere. All the wire connections seem to be good on this switch. This one still seems okay, which means that I can move on to reconnecting these bus lines here. I do somewhat like the J-hook idea, so just to make it a little bit easier to solder, I'll form little J's on these cut points. We'll do the top bus first and then the bottom bus, just so that I don't have to move the wires around quite as much yet. Be a lot better at this by the time we get down to the bottom bus. I'm just going to take my length and add a little bit to it. my life easier by stripping the wire in advance. Let's see if that is enough. It is indeed. So I can cut that off and then add hooks to it. Looks like we're going to want our hooks to lean forward a little bit, so I'm going to adjust those. Once again, not what I was expecting to be doing, but whatever. Okay, that's sitting nicely. Side tack to itself, let it cool for a second, and then the other side in there. Visual inspection. Everything seems good. Update on the modem module boards. Addie still hasn't built the rest of them. I keep telling you guys that she's on Twitter and you should yell at her so that we can get our A5C11. I'm going to make these patches quickly and about the right length, and if anything isn't quite long enough, we'll just make another one for that spot and move on and keep it in a pile with the hope that it'll find a nice place to live down the run. Alright, little fella. Are you magnetic? I may need my tweezers. That's what I was saying on the top set when I said that it needed to be leaned out a little bit. So we'll lean it out some more. This is a bit like watching a bonsai trimming. It's very zen. Making these a little bit more curved in. got a problem. Stuck. Alright. Oh, that's attached. I'll do this one real quick. Couldn't get the piece to let go because it's so light. And when it doesn't let go, it has more time to transfer the heat to the other joints. So this joint here remelted. And that allowed it to fall. But it stayed soldered, so we're good. It's days like these where I remember the YouTube comments of people saying things like, it's like the Bob Ross of soldering. Well, I've got good access to these two gaps now, so maybe I will do them. I feel like I'm already more comfortable with the situation, so why not? Oh, camera got angry. It's actually a nice change of pace. I've been doing badge artwork for the last 4 days or so, like 12 plus hours every day. Because it sounds like the post-Chinese New Year, go back to work time and supply lines and supply stuff is going to be a little bit weird, at the very least. So having everything ready to go in advance is probably the best bet. Where's my nippers? Yeah, it's definitely surgery red. The switch distances between the holes was a little bit too narrow from the pre-existing box, so I had to cut the bus lines in 3 different positions. So there's 12 bus bar repairs to be made in here, and a couple of the point-to-point wires that go off to the jacks are also broken from the move, the transplant. Rabbit hole's already started. If you hear a bunch of noise in the background, that's what's up with that. I'm enjoying being antisocial up in my own lab. soldering things peacefully. Looks like that one came out a little longer than necessary, but maybe. I hear Ron down there. Peter. Oh, come on. That was going to be impressive, and then it fell. Guess we're just going to have to use our big old heat sink here. It's a mess. Okay, that repair is solid. Moving on. It's going to take ages. I am 1/3 done though with this part. Well, yeah, it would make sense to do insulation and heat shrink and all of that if I wasn't the tech that services the unit. I think it would make more sense, but even then, this bare wire point-to-point for line level really, the insulation's not really going to get me much other than avoiding shorts. But it's solid core wire, so it doesn't really move around on its own. If it's moving, it's generally because I'm moving it. And of course, the initial construction on this was just, you know, stringing a wire all the way down the length of the bus, soldering it into all the points it needed to, and actually no, on this one, these are all the leads from those mil-spec resistors. So the bus is formed by the leads. Huh. Cool. Whisker of the past. I dig it. Very efficient. Three-dimensional dead bug kind of stuff. Yeah, magnet wire is cool. You'd have to have quite a thick gauge of it to do this kind of work, though. should just tin these patches before I put them into place. Save myself a couple minutes. It's interesting that some people call these forceps and some people call them hemostats. Everyone in the medical industry I know calls them hemostats. I'm not sure I gotta look at the inside of that keyboard you built, Red. Maybe I did. I had a lot going on in my brain at the time. I do remember it was super cool. That part stuck. Doing my best not to mess with these if I can help it, because they're delicate. One thing here is that the bus bar, you actually haven't seen the whole thing. The ground bus is point to point and it's shielded, you know, with oh, we were just talking about it, the casing is still on this wire. So I did that one where I stripped it at a point, 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 and then soldered it on all those points. That's how I would normally do it if I were building it with wire. That's pretty normal for me, because I've seen what happens when a mouse crawls in there and goes nuts. See if we can get focused that close. Oh, it's so close. So you can see the black line is the ground bus coming in there. And it just ties all of the shields together of all of those line inputs. I'm not sure if that's the best way of doing that. I think the best way might be to just have the shield line from a single one of them connected up and then have that connected to chassis. But what I did want to point out was that the shield lines of these cables here are connected up to the shield line of those jacks coming from the line outputs of the audio interface, but they're not connected anything up here. So each one of these is sort of in its little own Faraday cage. And now the whole box is one around that. Red and I were talking the other day about the branching tree of paths to ground. And in this particular instance, we've got 8 trunks coming up, but they're coming up from the same unit. So each one of these has a ground connection down to the audio interface. Okay, I think that's all I got in me for the moment though. I've been at this a while. So I'm going to pick this back up later. Before I go, I'll flip this up. You can see the progress on the reclaimed box that we took all the crap out of the other day. Yeah, that's way better than the box it was in. Alright, I'm going to shut this down for the moment. and I will update when I get a minute. But it's badge season, so, you know, those moments far and few between. See you guys later.